Hello, and now for a few chapters of On the Banks of Plum Creek. We're getting to the end. I figure we have this reading, and then I marked where I'll stop, and then one more. Okay, so this reading is called, this is chapter 33, which is Wheels of Fire. All the days were peaceful after that July day when the grasshoppers flew away. Rain fell and grass grew again all over the land that had been eaten bare and left brown and ugly. Ragweeds grew faster and careless weeds and the big spreading tumbleweeds like bushes. Willows and cottonwoods and plum thickets put out leaves again. There would be no fruit, for blossom time was past. There would be no wheat, but wild hay was growing coarse in low places by the creek. Potatoes lived, and there were fish in the fish trap. Pa hitched Sam and David to Mr. Nelson's plow and plowed part of the weedy wheat field. He plowed a wide fire break west of the house, from the creek to the creek again. On the field, he sowed turnip seeds. It's late, he said. The old folks say to sow turnips the 25th of July, wet or dry. But I guess the old folks didn't figure on grasshoppers, and likely there will be as many turnips as you and the girls can handle, Caroline. I won't be here to do it. Pa must go away to the east again to work where there were harvests, for the house was not yet paid for, and he must buy salt and cornmeal and sugar. He could not stay to cut the hay that Sam and David and Spot must have to eat next winter, but Mr. Nelson agreed to cut and stack Pa's wild hay for a share of it. Then one early morning, Pa went walking away. He went whistling out of sight with his roll over his shoulder. But there was not one hole in his boots. He would not mind the walk, and some day, he said, he would come walking back home again. In the mornings, after the chores of the housework were done, Laura and Mary studied their books. In the afternoons, Ma heard their lessons. Then they might play or sew their seams till time to meet the herd and bring Spot and the calf home. Then came the chores again, and supper dishes, and bedtime. After Mr. Nelson stacked Pa's hay by the stable, the days were warm on the sunny side of the stacks, but the shady sides were cool. The wind blew chill and the mornings were frosty. One morning when Laura drove Spot and her calf to meet the herd, Johnny was having trouble with the cattle. He was trying to drive them out of the prairie to the west, where the frost-bitten brown grass was tall. The cattle did not want to go. They kept turning and dodging back. Laura and Jack helped him drive them. The sun was coming up then, and the sky was clear. But before Laura got back to the house, she saw a low cloud in the west. She wrinkled her nose and sniffed long and deep. And then she remembered Indian territory. Ma, she called. Ma came outdoors and looked at the cloud. It's far away, Laura, Ma said. Likely it won't come this far. All morning the wind blew out of the west. At noon, it was blowing more strongly, and Ma and Mary and Laura stood in the doorway and watched the dark cloud coming nearer. I wonder where the herd is, Ma asked, worried. At last, they could see a flickering brightness under the cloud. If the cows are safe across the creek, we needn't worry, said Ma. Fire cannot cross that fire break. Better come in the house, girls, and eat your dinner. She took Carrie into the house, but Laura and Mary looked once more at the smoke rolling nearer. Then Ma pointed and opened her mouth but could not speak. Then Laura screamed, Ma, Ma, a wheel of fire! In front of the red flickering smoke, a wheel of fire came rolling swiftly, setting fire to the grass as it came. Another and another and another came rolling in fast before the wind. The first one was whirling across the fire break. With the water pail and a mop, Ma ran to meet it. She struck it with the wet mop and beat it out black on the ground. She ran to meet the next one, but more and more were coming. Stay back, Laura, she shouted. Laura stayed back against the house, holding Mary's hand and watching. In the house, Carrie was crying because Ma had shut her in. The wheels of fire came on faster and faster. They were the big tumbleweeds that had ripened round and dry and pulled up by their small roots so that the wind would blow them far and scatter their seeds. But now they were burning. Still, they rolled before the roaring wind, and the roaring big fire followed them. Smoke swirled now around Ma where she ran, beating with her mop at those fiery, swift wheels. Jack shivered against Laura's legs, and tears ran out of Laura's smarting eyes. That means like stinging. Mr. Nelson's gray colt came galloping up, and Mr. Nelson jumped off at the stable. He grabbed a pitchfork and shouted, "Run, quick, bring wet rags." He went running to help Ma. Laura and Mary ran to the creek with gunny sacks. They ran back with them sopping wet, and Mr. Nelson put one on the pitchfork tines. Ma's pail was empty. Then she ran and filled it. The wheels of fire were running up the knoll. Streaks of fire followed through the dry grass. Ma and Mr. Nelson fought them with mop and wet sacks. "The haystacks," Laura screamed. One wheel of fire had gone to the haystack. Mr. Nelson and Ma went running through the smoke. Another wheel came rolling over the black burned ground towards the house. Laura was so frightened that she didn't know what she was doing. Carrie was in the house. Laura beat that burning wheel to death with a wet gunny sack. Then there were no more wheels. Ma and Mr. Nelson had stopped the fire at the haystack. Bits of sooty hay and grass swirled in the air while the big fire rushed to the fire break, but it could not get across. It ran fast to the south to the creek. It ran north and came to the creek there. It could not go any farther, so the fire dwindled down and died. The clouds of smoke were blowing away, and the prairie fire was over. Mr. Nelson had gone on his gray colt after the cattle. They were safe on the other side of the creek. "We are grateful to you, Mr. Nelson," said Ma. "You saved our place. The girls and I could never have done it alone." When he had gone away, she said, "There is nothing in the world so good as good neighbors. Come now, girls, and wash and eat your dinner." Wow. Here's a picture of them battling. So they're taking their sacks and getting water on them and beating down fire. And that's Mr. Nelson and Ma with the mops. So scary. They have a lot of obstacles. Okay, chapter 34, Marks on the Slate. After the prairie fire, the weather was so cold that Ma said they must hurry to dig the potatoes and pull the turnips before they froze. She dug the potatoes while Mary and Laura picked them up and carried them down the cellar in pails. The wind blew hard and sharp. They wore their shawls, but of course not their mittens. Mary's nose was red and Laura's was icy cold, and their hands were stiff and their feet were numb, but they were glad to have so many potatoes. It was good to thaw by the stove when the chores were done and to smell the warm smells of the potatoes boiling and the fish frying. It was good to eat and then go to bed. Then in the dark, gloomy weather, they pulled the turnips. That was harder than picking up potatoes. The turnips were big and stubborn, and often Laura pulled till she sat down hard when the turnip came up. All the juicy green tops must be cut off with a butcher knife. The juice wet their hands, and the wind chapped them till they cracked and bled. And Ma made a salve of lard and beeswax and melted it together for them to rub on their hands at night. But Spot and her calf ate the juicy turnip tops and saved them. And it was good to know that there were turnips enough in the cellar to last all winter long. They would be boiled turnips and mashed turnips and creamed turnips. And in the winter evenings, a plate of raw turnips would be on the table by the lamp. They would peel off the thick rinds and eat the raw turnips in crisp, juicy slices. One day they put the last turnip in the cellar, and Ma said, "Well, it can freeze now." And sure enough, that night the ground froze, and in the morning snow was falling outside the windows. Now Mary thought of a way to count the days until Pa would come home. Her last letter had said that 2 more weeks would finish the threshing where he was. So Mary brought out the slate, and on it she made a mark for each day of 1 week, 7 marks. Under them she made another mark for each day of the next week, 7 more marks. The last mark was for the day Pa would come. But when they showed the slate to Ma, she said, "Better make marks for another week for Pa to walk all the way home." So Mary slowly made 7 more marks. Laura did not like to see so many marks between now and the time Pa would come home. But every night before they went to bed, Mary rubbed one out, and that one day was gone. Every morning Laura thought, this whole day must go by before Mary can rub out another mark. Outdoors smelled good in the chilly mornings. The sun melted away the snow, but the ground was hard and frosty. Plum Creek was still awake. Brown leaves were floating away on the water under the wintry blue sky. At night, it was cozy to be in the lamplit house by the warm stove. Laura played with Carrie and Jack on the clean, smooth floor. Ma sat comfortably mending, and Mary's book was spread under the lamp. "It's bedtime, girls," Ma said, taking off her thimble. Then Mary rubbed out one more mark and put the slate away. One night, she rubbed out the first day of the last week. They all watched her do it, and Mary said, as she put the slate away, "Pa is walking home now. Those are the marks he will walk on." In the corner, Jack suddenly made a glad sound, as if he understood her. Then he ran to the door. He stood up against the door, scratching and whining and waggling. Then Laura heard faint whistling through the wind, the whistling of when Johnny comes marching home. It's Pa," she shrieked, and she tore the door open and ran pell-mell down through the windy dark with Jack bounding ahead. "Hello, half-pint," Pa said, hugging her tight. "Good dog, Jack." Lamplight streamed in from the door, and Mary was coming, and Ma and Carrie. "How's my little one?" Pa said, giving Carrie a toss. "Here's my big girl now," he said, and pulled Mary's braid. "Give me a kiss, Caroline, if you can reach me through these wild Indians." Then there was supper to get for Pa, and no one thought of going to bed. Laura and Mary told him everything at once, all about the wheels of fire, and all about the potatoes and the turnips, and how big Spot's calf was, and how far they had studied in their books. And Mary said, "But Pa, you can't be here. You didn't walk off the marks on the slate." She showed him the marks still there, and that those were the marks he was to walk on. "I see," said Pa, "but you did not rub out the marks for the days it took my letter to come so far. I hurried fast all the way, too, for they say it's already a hard winter coming from the north. What do we need to get in town, Caroline?" Ma said that they did not need anything. They had eaten so many fish and potatoes that the flour was still holding out, and the sugar and even the tea. Only the salt was low, and that would last several days. "Then I better get the wood up before we go to town," said Pa. "I don't like the sound of that wind, and they tell me that Minnesota blizzards come up fast and sudden. I've heard of some folks that went down to town and a blizzard came up so quickly they couldn't get back. Their children at home burned all the furniture, but they froze stark stiff before the blizzard cleared up enough so folks could get home to them." Okay, so that is chapter 33. So we'll read a couple more, but I think that might have been what we would call foreshadowing, where the author gives a hint of something that might come, like possibly a blizzard. Also, we saw a little bit of foreshadowing before the last chapter when Pa clear cut, and that means to cut the bushes and things low, so in case there's a fire, it doesn't catch. And after Pa did the clear cutting, then a fire came. So sometimes an author uses that technique called foreshadowing to give you a hint of what might come. Chapter 35, Keeping House. Now in the daytimes, Pa was driving the wagon up and down Plum Creek and bringing load after load of logs to the pile by the door. He cut down old plum trees and old willow trees and cottonwoods, leaving only the little ones to grow. He hauled them and stacked them and chopped them and split them in the stove wood till he had a big wood pile. With his short-handled axe in his belt, his traps on his arm, and his gun against his shoulder, he walked far up Plum Creek, setting traps for muskrat and mink and otter and fox. One evening at supper, Pa said he had found a beaver meadow. He did not set traps there because there are so few beavers were left. He had seen a fox and shot at it, but he had missed. "I'm all out of practice hunting. It's a fine place we have here, but there isn't much game. Makes a fellow think of all those places out west where—" "There are no schools out west for the children, Charles," said Ma. "You're right, Caroline. You usually are," said Pa. "Listen to that wind. We'll have a storm come tomorrow." But the next day was mild as spring. The air was soft and warm, and the sun shone brightly. In the middle of the morning, Pa came to the house. "Let's have an early dinner and take a walk to town this afternoon," he said to Ma. This is too nice of a day for you to stay indoors. Time enough for that when winter will really come." "But the children," said Ma. "We can't take Carrie and walk so far." "Shucks," Pa laughed at her. "Mary and Laura are great girls now. They can take care of Carrie for one afternoon." "Of course we can, Ma," said Laura and Mary. "Of course we can." So they watched Pa and Ma start gaily away. Ma was so pretty in her brown and red Christmas shawl with her brown knit hood tied under her chin, and she stepped so quickly and looked up at Pa so merrily that Laura thought she was like a bird. Then Laura swept the floor while Mary cleared the table. Mary washed the dishes, and Laura wiped them down and put them in the cupboard. They put the red checkered cloth on the table. Now the whole long afternoon was before them, and they could do as they pleased. First, they decided to play school. Mary said she must be the teacher because she was older, and besides, she knew more. Laura knew that was true. So Mary was the teacher, and she liked it, but Laura soon grew tired of that play. I know, said Laura. Let's both teach Carrie her letters. They sat Carrie on a bench and held the book before her, and they both did their best. But Carrie did not like it. She would not learn their letters, so they had to stop that. Well, said Laura, let's keep playing house. Let's play keeping house. We are keeping house, said Mary. What is the use of playing it? The house was empty and still with Ma gone. Ma was so quiet and gentle that she never made much noise, but now the whole house was listening for her. Laura went outdoors for a while by herself, but she came back. The afternoon grew longer and longer. There was nothing at all to do. Even Jack walked up and down restlessly. He asked to go out, but when Laura opened the door, he would not go out. He lay down and got up and walked around and around the room. He came to Laura and looked at her earnestly. What is it, Jack? Laura asked him. He stared at her, but she could not understand, and then he almost howled. Don't, Jack, Laura told him quickly. You're scaring me. Is something outdoors? Mary wondered. Laura ran out, but on the doorstep, Jack took a hold of her dress and pulled her back in. Outdoor was bitter cold. Laura shut the door. Look, she said, the sunshine is dark. Are the grasshoppers coming back? Not in the wintertime, Goosey, said Mary. Maybe it's rain. Goosey yourself, Laura said back. It doesn't rain in the wintertime. Well, snow then. What's the difference? Mary was angry, and so was Laura. They would have gone on quarreling, but suddenly there was no sunshine. They ran to look through the bedroom window. A dark cloud with a fleecy white underside was rolling fast from the northwest. Mary and Laura looked out the front window. Surely it was time for Pa and Ma to come, but they were nowhere in sight. Maybe it's a blizzard, said Mary. Like Pa told us about, said Laura. They looked at each other through the gray air. They were thinking of those children who froze, stark stiff, that Pa had told them about. The wood box is empty, said Laura. Mary grabbed her. You can't, said Mary. Ma told us to stay in the house if it stormed. Laura jerked away and Mary said, Besides, Jack won't let you. We've got to bring in wood before the storm gets here, Laura yelled. Hurry! They could hear a strange sound in the wind like a faraway screaming. They put on their shawls and pinned them under their chins with their large shawl pins. They put on their mittens. Laura was ready first. She told Jack, Jack, we've got to bring in wood. He seemed to understand. He went with her and stayed close at her heels. The wind was colder than icicles. Laura ran to the wood pile, piled up a big armful of wood, and ran back with Jack behind her. She could not open the door while she held the wood. Mary opened the door for her. Then they did not know what to do. The cloud was coming swiftly, and they must bring in wood before the storm got there. They could not open the door with their arms full of wood. They could not leave the door open and let all the cold come in. I can open the door, said Carrie. You can't, Mary said. I can too, said Carrie, and she reached up both hands and turned the knob. She could do it. Carrie was big enough to open the door. Laura and Mary then hurried fast, bringing in wood. Carrie opened the door when they came in and shut it behind them. Mary could carry large armloads, but Laura was quicker. They filled the wood box before it began to snow. Then the snow came suddenly with a whirling blast, like it was small, hard grains of sand. It stung Laura's face where it struck. When Carrie opened the door, it swirled into the house in a white cloud. And here's a picture of them doing that. So that's looks like Laura coming in, Carrie's holding the door, and Mary's loading the wood up. Good job, girls. They're being so responsible. Laura and Mary forgot that Ma had told them to stay in the house when it stormed. They forgot everything except bringing in the wood. They ran frantically back and forth, bringing each time all the wood they could stagger under. They piled the wood all around the wood box and all around the stove. They piled it against the wall. They made big piles higher and bigger. Bang! They banged the door. Then they ran to the woodpile. Clop, clop, clop. They stacked the wood in their arms. Then they ran to the door. Bump! The door went open, and bang! They bumped backed it shut. Thumpity lump thump. They flung down the wood and ran back outdoors to the woodpile, panting back again. They could hardly see the woodpile in the swirling whiteness. Snow was driven all in among the wood. They could hardly see the house, and Jack was a large blob hurrying beside them. The hard snow scoured their faces. Laura's arms ached and her chest panted, and all the time she thought, "Oh, where is Pa? Where is Ma?" And she felt, "Hurry, hurry!" And she heard the wind screeching. The woodpile was gone. Mary took a few sticks and Laura took a few sticks, and then there was no more. They ran to the door together, and Laura opened it and Jack bounded in. Carrie was at the front window, clapping her hands and squealing. Laura dropped her sticks of wood and turned just in time to see Ma and Pa burst, running out of the whirling whiteness of the snow. Pa was holding Ma's hand and pulling to help her run. They burst into the house and they slammed the door, and they stood panting, covered with snow. No one said anything, while Pa and Ma looked at Laura and Mary, who stood all snowy in their shawls and mittens. At last Mary said in a small voice, "We did go out in the storm, Ma. We forgot." Laura bowed her head down and said, "We didn't want to burn up the furniture, Pa, and freeze stark stiff." "Well, I'll be darned," said Pa, "if they didn't move the whole wood pile in. All the wood I cut in the last couple of weeks." There, piled up in the house, was the whole wood pile. Melted snow was leaking out of it, spreading into puddles. A wet path went to the door, where the snow lay unmelted. Then Pa's great laugh rang out, "Ha, ha, ha!" And Ma's gentle smile shone warm on Laura and Mary, and they knew they were forgiven for disobeying, because they had been wise to bring in the wood, though perhaps they didn't need to bring in quite so much wood. Sometime soon they would be old enough not to make any mistakes, and then they could always decide what to do just right. They would not have to obey Pa and Ma anymore. They bustled to take off Ma's shawl and hood and brush the snow from them and hang them up to dry. Pa hurried to the stable to do the chores before the storm grew worse. Then, while Ma rested, they stacked the wood neatly as she told them, and they swept and mopped the floor. The house was neat and cozy again. The tea kettle hummed. The fire shone brightly from the draughts above the stove hearth. Snow swished against the windows. Pa came in. "Here's the little milk I could get here with. The wind blew it up out of the pail. Caroline, this is a terrible storm. I could see an inch, and the wind come from I couldn't see 1 inch, and the wind coming from all directions at once. I thought I was on the path, but I could not see the house. And well, then I just barely bumped against the door. Another foot to the left, and I never would have gotten in." "Charles," said Ma. "Nothing to be scared about now," said Pa. "But if we hadn't run all the way home from town and beat this storm here." Then his eyes twinkled, and he rumpled Mary's hair, and he pulled Laura's ear and said, "I'm glad all the wood is in the house, too." Okay, so we're going to stop there. So exciting. And the next chapter is called Prairie Winter. Oh boy. Okay, hope you guys are enjoying it. Post your comments, and I will read again soon. Take care, everyone. Stay cozy in your own house.